World War II, arguably one of the biggest messes in human history, ended in 1945 with the Allied forces claiming victory and Nazi Germany getting a well-deserved kick to the curb. But what if the unthinkable happened? What if Germany had actually won? Imagine a world where instead of freedom, we're all wearing swastika-themed pajamas, and Hitler's version of world domination is on full display. Sounds like a dystopian nightmare, right? Well, buckle up, because in this video, we're going to explore how Germany could have pulled off the win, what would have happened if they did, and how we might all be speaking German while ordering our coffee with a side of oppression. Get ready for a wild, alternate history ride. The Battle of Britain, 1940. For Germany to have won the war, several key events would have needed to unfold differently. These are the three critical steps that could have paved the way for Nazi Germany's domination. The Battle of Britain was one of the first major setbacks for Nazi Germany. After the fall of France in June 1940, Hitler turned his attention to Britain, planning to knock it out of the war. The Germans launched relentless air raids known as the Blitz, but despite the heavy bombing campaigns, Britain managed to hold out. For Germany to win, they would have needed to decisively defeat Britain in the air, forcing it to either surrender or negotiate peace. If the Germans had succeeded in crippling Britain's Royal Air Force and establishing air superiority, they could have followed with a sea invasion. The British would likely have been overwhelmed, and once Britain fell, the Allies would have been left without a significant stronghold in Europe. In this alternate scenario, Britain's defeat would have brought the European theater of war to a near close. The fall of the British Empire would have been a monumental shift in global power. The Battle of Stalingrad, 1941–42. The Battle of Stalingrad was one of the deadliest confrontations in history. Germany's failure to capture the Soviet city marked a major turning point in the war. Had Germany won the battle and captured Stalingrad, it would have significantly weakened the Soviet Union and opened the door for a larger-scale invasion of the Soviet Union's heartland. For Germany to have won the war, they would have needed to decisively crush Soviet resistance. A victory at Stalingrad would have allowed German forces to advance eastward, capturing key resources like oil in the Caucasus and securing a strategic position in the region. By eliminating the Soviet Union as a military power, Germany would have been able to focus on its war with the United States and solidify its dominance over Europe. Invasion and colonization of the United States. In this alternate timeline, Germany's ambitions would not have stopped in Europe. With the collapse of Britain and the Soviet Union, the United States would have been the last major obstacle to German hegemony. The Germans would have likely allied with Japan in their quest to conquer North America. In 1941, Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor, drawing the U.S. into the war. However, had Germany been in a stronger position, having defeated Britain, and the Soviets' American resistance might have been overwhelmed. The Nazis, with the help of their Japanese allies, could have launched a full-scale invasion of the United States. The successful conquest of the U.S. would have been a monumental achievement, but it would have been far from easy. The Americans, with their industrial power, would have fought back fiercely, but the combination of German military strategy and Japanese naval power could have overwhelmed the U.S. After these victories, the Axis powers would have divided the world between them. Nazi Germany would have likely established a puppet government in the United States, with Japan controlling the Pacific region and parts of the West Coast. The division of the U.S. between the two powers would have been a grim reality for the American people, with resistance movements sprouting up across the country. The ramifications of a Nazi victory. If Nazi Germany had succeeded in winning the war, the world would have been unrecognizable, plunging humanity into an era of unprecedented suffering and oppression. The consequences of such a victory would have been catastrophic, with tens of millions of lives lost through genocide, forced labor, and war. Entire populations would have been subjected to horrific racial policies, including mass exterminations and the systematic dismantling of cultures and societies deemed inferior by the Nazi regime. The fabric of civilization would have been irreparably altered, with democratic systems, human rights, and freedoms wiped out in favor of an authoritarian empire. Economies would have been restructured to serve the interests of the Nazi state, and the global order would have shifted under the shadow of fascism. Ultimately, a Nazi victory would have led to the creation of a brutal and dystopian world order, where fear, hatred, and totalitarian control reigned supreme. The Nazi Empire. Nazi Germany's ultimate goal was not merely military victory, but the establishment of a new world order based on the supremacy of the Aryan race. With the conquest of Europe and the eventual defeat of the United States, the Nazis would have likely imposed their brutal ideology across the globe. Their vision of racial purity, enforced through eugenics, would have seen the systematic eradication of Jews, Slavs, Roma, and other marginalized groups. Totalitarian control would have been exercised globally, with the Nazi regime asserting dominance over all aspects of life, from politics to culture, reshaping societies through fear, oppression, and propaganda. Racial hierarchy and genocide. The most horrific consequence of the Nazi victory would have been the systematic extermination of entire groups of people. The Nazis already implemented genocidal policies against Jews, Roma people, Slavs, and others deemed undesirable. Had they won the war, these policies would have been expanded on a global scale. Nazi ideology viewed the Slavs, Jews, Romani, and other non-Aryan groups as inferior, and their extermination was central to Hitler's vision of a pure world. In the wake of Germany's victory, millions more would have perished in death camps, forced labor, and military occupation. The Holocaust would not have been limited to Europe, but would have spread across the world, with African nations and parts of Asia facing similar oppression. The fate of the Catholic Church and Christianity. One of the lesser-known aspects of Nazi ideology was its opposition to Christianity. The Nazis tolerated the Catholic Church primarily due to its alliance with Italy, but once Hitler consolidated power in Europe, he would have turned his sights on the Church itself. The Vatican and Catholic institutions would have been targeted for eradication, and any Christian resistance would have been crushed. The Nazi regime would have attempted to replace Christianity with a new state religion centered around Nazi beliefs. Christian symbols and institutions would have been banned, and the Church would have faced mass executions of clergy and the closure of religious institutions. In this new world, religion would have been entirely subordinate to the state. The division between Germany and Japan. While Germany and Japan would have worked together initially, their alliance would have eventually been strained. Both powers had imperial ambitions, but their visions for the post-war world were fundamentally different. Japan had its eyes on the Pacific, while Germany wanted to establish a massive European empire. Tensions between the two would have grown, possibly leading to a conflict between them. In the long run, it is conceivable that a Cold War-like scenario would have emerged between the two Axis powers. Germany, with its focus on racial purity and its European empire, might have seen Japan's expansion in the Pacific as a threat to its global dominance, leading to an eventual breakdown of their alliance. Would there have been a global uprising? Even in a world dominated by Nazi Germany, resistance would not have been easily quashed. Throughout history, oppressive regimes have faced resistance movements, and Nazi Germany would have been no exception. In occupied Europe, partisans and underground resistance groups would have continued to fight against their oppressors. In the US, after the German invasion, guerrilla warfare would likely have broken out, with Americans taking up arms to overthrow their new masters. However, these resistance movements would have been brutally suppressed. The Gestapo, the SS, and other Nazi organizations would have used terror tactics, mass executions, and extreme repression to crush any opposition. In this scenario, the chances for a successful global uprising would have been slim, as the regime would have ruled with an iron fist and controlled vast military resources. That's all for today's video. If you found this video intriguing, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned for more deep dives into history's most fascinating what-ifs.